All right, how's it going, everyone? So I want to have a little talk about how we do styling in React. I'm not an expert. I don't really know all the different ways. I've barely even played with most of these. I've been using Sass at work for the past like 3+ years, so that's kind of the approach I'm used to. But I've kind of dabbled with learning, about these different approaches, and I'll kind of give my opinion on them and why they might be good, why they might be bad. But I also want to kind of ask the question is like, why do we have so many different approaches to do the same thing, right? It's like, why do we have to keep changing all this stuff? And then we're going to end up going full circle back to like the exact same approach that we started with, honestly. Like when CSS starts getting more features added to it and like more capabilities, like I'm sure we're going to like leave all these approaches and go back to CSS. So when it comes to styling React, you could just do CSS style sheets, which is an okay approach. But there's a lot of stuff that you might miss out on because when you use CSS and you have like hundreds of style sheets, it's very easy to make a change to one and pretty much break your entire application if you're not careful. So you have to be very, very careful when you're modifying your style sheets and have some type of structure in place or procedure in place so you don't make it unmanageable. And there's a lot of like conventions people use, like BEM is one convention that people use to kind of scope their stylings to a block element modifier. It's kind of the same as like just styling your components, honestly. I don't know if there's really a benefit to using BIM when you're using React, because React has the ability to kind of scope and style your components directly. But this exists, and typically when you use CSS, you end up having to use one of these like conventions because it just makes your stuff easier to organize. Or if you're using something like Sass, like you have the ability to do scoped styles, so you can have like nested brackets of styling that only apply to a certain parent style or parent class. And I would say the benefit of using external CSS or Sass style sheets is that you've kind of decoupled your styling from your UI, right? So anyone can just come in, like if you have a designer who sucks at React, they can still go into your style sheets and change stuff. And everything could be pretty much modified with very, very little need to touch your actual like HTML or your React code or JavaScript, right? When you start coupling your styling into your JavaScript, like then you actually need to have someone who kind of knows what they're doing and they can dive around these different components and know how to navigate your code base. But if you keep the styling sheet separate, for some that makes it easier to manage. For others, it probably makes it more into a nightmare. And as your project gets larger, I think it does start becoming more of a nightmare to handle all these different style sheets. Kind of talked about that. Well, let's talk about the different styles in React. So there's Inline CSS. This guy says it's the worst approach. I'm not really sure why it would be the worst, because like this approach is basically the same as all these other garbage approaches. You can still have your styles come from objects. Since this is in JavaScript, you can dynamically change this or generate this however you want. So you can kind of build your own framework to generating your styles and have like global variables set places and interpolate those globals into your styles that you want. So, I mean, this gives you just as much flexibility as like most of these other approaches. I would say the main benefit for having your CSS-in-JS is that you can hook it into your React state. So you can change style based on your React and JavaScript code, okay? Now, in terms of like performance issues, I don't know if it's more performant to have your style sheets external because maybe it loads faster. I haven't really done any research on that, but I'm sure there's some type of performance trade-offs of having your styles embedded inside your React components versus having them external inside of like a minified CSS style sheet. But anyway, inline CSS, this is how you do it. I've done this a couple of times. I mean, it works if you just need to like get something quick out there. But at some point, I guess it could become kind of unmanageable. I don't really know. Regular CSS, we kind of already talked about it. It's good, but it can get really unmanageable as your project gets larger. As he says here, as CSS might become a problem if you're working on a larger project, right? You have to have like some type of agreement or a style guide so that your CSS doesn't become super unmanageable. But I mean, this works as well. If you want to keep like your components clean from styling, you can do this. It's just a matter of preference, honestly. I will say there is some issues for having styling kind of like baked into your components. If you want to easily be able to like modify this component, let's say you want to have like a blue button and an orange button, primary or secondary. Typically with this type of approach, you end up having to like make all these different components, like a primary button or secondary button, or you have to allow a prop to be sent in that'll basically change the styling dynamically based on what the prop was sent in. And you end up like keep on allowing extra props to be sent in because you need some, special styling to happen on your component. Versus with, BIM or your external style sheets where you're basically just adding modifiers or classes to your components. You really just need to add a class name and you're done, right? So I think there are some drawbacks to having like these style components because you have to like keep on adding properties in to like change the styling and stuff. But maybe it's not that big of an issue. So for CSS in JS, so like I haven't used React JSS before. It seems like it's pretty cool, but honestly, it seems like you're basically just taking CSS and just putting it directly in your code, which at that point, like, why not just use CSS? And what happens with a lot of these approaches is that the class names that it puts on your components are just like randomly generated IDs. So when you go to your like Chrome inspector and try to look at your components, they just have like random ass like letters, and it makes it very hard to like actually be able to go and like modify it on the fly and like see how it looks, because now you're like, there's nothing you can really like look for. It's not really human readable friendly, which is one thing I really like about external style sheets is typically all the class names on your components or your DOM elements have like human friendly names, and it's very easy to just like look through your DOM elements and see exactly like, okay, this is a header or this is your header bold or something. I don't know if I'm making sense at this point, but let's just keep on going down. So style components is a really popular one. It's kind of similar to the one we just saw, where basically you make a component, but you like give it some styling. I really don't like this approach. I think it makes your code base very hard to read, because now in your code base, you have a bunch of capital letter components everywhere that aren't actually React components, right? There's like this understood convention that when you see a capital named element in your JSX, that it's an actual like subcomponent or a child component or like a shared component you can use that does a different thing logically. But when you start polluting that with all these style components, it's very hard to see in your code base, like, is this a logical component or is this an actual style component? And I know there's people who do prefixes and put like, this would be called style button, but it just seems kind of hacky. You just have like a bunch of like stuff all spread out your code base, and I don't know. It just doesn't seem right to me. But hey, if people like using it, that's cool. You can use style components. I would probably use CSS modules, or if I was going to go with this approach, I might use emotion. This looks like more of my cup of tea, where you can actually like, type out your CSS here and apply it to your elements directly. You don't have to like pollute your project with a bunch of capital style components everywhere. I don't know. It's probably same thing, different flavor. CSS modules are pretty cool. It allows you to have like the ability to have external style sheets if that's like your cup of tea, but you still have the issue with your class names are just like a jumbled thing of letters, like randomly generated letters, which make it very unfriendly to read when you're debugging, but you kind of get used to it if you want to. It's just a different styling of basically you define your styles here, and then for every class you define, you can kind of just pull it in like this. But I think there's like I don't know if you can do like hyphens or underscores between your style names. You probably can, but you probably have to do like brackets here. I don't know why they made like, okay, whoever made this site, this blog, this is so inaccessible. Like when I highlight stuff, I can't even read the text. It's so bad. Let's just keep going down. So Sass, this guy says Sass is the best. I don't know if I agree. Like it's cool to have CSS and Sass externally, but at some point when your project is really large, it just becomes like unmanageable. Like in the project I'm on, we have an external CSS design system, and we extend it using Sass. And every time we change a Sass file, it takes 10 seconds to recompile the entire Sass project, which maybe there's an issue with our code that we need to fix, but something with Sass just seems slow. Maybe it's because we're using Webpack, honestly, and that's the issue. But I don't know. I think Sass is cool, but at some point, like, it just starts slowing down. At least that's what I've seen. And then there's Less. I haven't used Less before, I don't think. Stylable. What is this? Here is another one. I don't know. So I guess the main thing I want to kind of talk about is why the hell are there so many different ways to do styling? Like, I don't understand as a community why we have to like diverge so much. And then all of a sudden, like something will get really popular and then it'll die out. And we're kind of left with like projects that are just rotting away. And you feel obligated to kind of refactor the approach that you did because it's no longer in style. Like the way open source works is that all these things like come and go so quick. And if you're more experienced, you should be hesitant to like just adopt these things because you don't know when the maintainer on GitHub decides that he doesn't want to use it anymore or doesn't want to maintain it anymore, and the project just becomes stale, and now you're using like some old deprecated library that no one else uses. So I'm kind of frustrated like why we can't just stick to one approach. Maybe it's a good thing that we have all these different approaches. It kind of increases the creativity and the innovation in the industry. But at the other hand, like, I don't know, I think it's just becoming a mess. I know Tailwind CSS is another one. I think Tailwind is actually pretty cool. So Tailwind is another one that's like super popular, and you can just put your styling like directly here using a bunch of like atomic classes. This has its pros and cons as well. Like one pro is that you can really quickly like style your HTML. But one major con is like your files end up becoming like really, really large in terms of like your horizontal scaling. Maybe that's not an issue for some people who have really big monitors, but for me on a laptop monitor, your stylings can kind of get out of hand at some point, but it's really not that big of a deal. And additionally, like Tailwind has a bunch of built-in like responsive classes that you can use that really makes your code base more concise. Like I think if I make a new project, I'll probably just use Tailwind just because A, everyone uses Tailwind, and B, it's actually really easy to copy and paste components directly into your code base from an external like site, right? So if I see someone who has a Tailwind card here, I can literally copy this whole thing, paste it into my React app, and I have the exact same card. I don't have to like install a React library or React component style library. I don't have to install something like Bootstrap or anything. Like I can just literally copy and paste code directly into my own code and just customize it as I need to, which I think is a huge benefit. I know Tailwind has like a component library that costs like 99 bucks or something, or might be cheaper or more expensive. I don't know. But it's really easy to just basically take their examples, copy it, put it into your code base, and you're done. All these other approaches, you can't really do that as well because like you have to assume that the styling you're looking at is using React, and more specifically that they're using like emotion. I guess that same approach applies to Tailwind. Like you have to be using Tailwind to copy and paste stuff, but I don't know. I don't know what I'm saying at this point. I hope you guys enjoyed my little talk that had absolutely no direction other than just complaining about why there's so many different freaking options of styling your React components. And I don't know which one the best approach is. Honestly, sometimes I just get fed up with all this and I just go back to writing external style sheets because it's easier sometimes. But yeah, I might just take the dive and start using Tailwind. It seems like everyone's using it, and it seems like you can be pretty productive with it. So it's hard to know like what approach works best until you actually start building a large scale application. And then like halfway through you getting to that large scale application, you start realizing this was a bad design decision, right? So like you won't know if this is a good approach until you start actually building a large application. You have to start customizing it. And then you might start working with a designer who's telling you to change stuff, and you realize, oh man, this is super hard to change now because of a certain ideology that this library or framework followed. But yeah, I think they all probably just achieve the same thing, honestly. Like we're just wasting our time and spinning our wheels trying to find the best approach. But honestly, all these approaches are probably just as bad. Anyway, have a good day and happy coding.